All right, let's talk about graphic design. Graphic design has this sort of name that makes it seem like it's so modern and new, and it's something that we've just been doing since computers have really been around. But really, it's as old as civilization itself. When we think about graphic design, we're really just talking about marketing and trying to create something of some appeal, whether aesthetically appealing or shocking or whatever, to catch the viewer's attention and drive them in a certain direction. Now, this can come down to really just a couple main factors, right? We're either going to have a design that has a very specific image, and then we're also going to have designs that see how well received it is. So that's really what we're looking for when we're thinking of graphic design, is those two things that allow us to get our message across as clear and concise as quickly as possible. Now, this focus on the visual interpretation of information can be seen, but it's not limited to, sort of the everyday things that we consume, right? We think about almost all this stuff, if you're looking around, has to be made by a designer of some sort, right? Down to its packaging, even the media we consume, the books, everything, the way things are wrapped, even ourselves, the way we think of why we're wearing the clothes that we are is probably because of pretty good design, graphic design, like saying in the advertisement, yeah, this is the trend, right, of the year. So graphic design's been going on. We can think of some guy, uh, you know, back, we're talking hundreds and hundreds of years ago, and he's got to compete as a blacksmith with somebody else in town. So what's he going to do to try to drive business his way? Think about all these old tactics that we still use this day, right? It's always been around. So now, um, one thing that makes graphic design sort of easier and be able to reinvent itself each year, it comes down to sort of the symbols that it's used, because we're coming up with a more almost universal language. So symbols, and I write there, seem to be agreed upon marks that have meaning or speak to something. Now, I can't really say that all symbols are universal, but if we look across all these icons here, and I like the one in the lower right, that even though some are even chopped off, we know what they are, right? They immediately jump out to us and says, this is what's going on. Now, I always like to talk about, when you travel, right? You think about where you travel, and when you land, whether it's another country or even just a major city, you all of a sudden find out really quickly how many signs and symbols and things that are not readily available to you in your visual lexicon, right? When you think about all those, I hate it when they always change like the bathroom signs, right? Just to like some new symbol, and I'm just like, I just want to make sure I'm gonna go in the right place. And but like I've been in other countries, and sometimes it's a word, and that's very hard to understand if you don't know that language. So symbols are letters, symbols are things. So I use that analogy only as if you really need to go somewhere, it comes down to how symbols have been put around you to help you get to that place. Letters, like I said, are symbols, but they also represent a sound. Images can be symbols, and then I put down in there, our symbols change almost every day. In that lower left, right, we know these emojis, but every time we seem to get a new operating system, or you can download the apps, right, you're getting new emojis every day. And every time I do like a kids workshop, the poop emoji still seems to be the most popular one. But so when we're talking about symbols, right, this is how graphic design has really capitalized on this imagery to help get that message across to as many people as quickly as possible. Now, some of the major movements in graphic design have been the printing press. It makes a whole lot of sense, right? That now you can pay to have more flyers made, or post. You can get all of that out there a whole lot quicker. The Industrial Revolution, and this it has just increased the commerce itself, so the ability to make money, and from there drive business. So that's there. And then same with globalization, right? All of these have been able to continue launching graphic design forward with the demand of that skill set that those designers have. But not always has this just been done for a commercial aspect. Artists like Andy Warhol used and sort of inverted the commercial aspect in his work. So he's taking something that would just be seen as commercial, made by somebody who's not technically doing it for art or for emotion. It's just for a message, right? It's Campbell's soup. This is what it is. You need to know the contents of it. But kind of putting it back through silkscreen medium and saying now it is art. So, he's really sort of challenging that vocabulary. We can say maybe he's also talking about consumption and stuff like that. But really taking these everyday objects that have a design component and inverting them for us. Artists also like Barbara Kruger uses these design components and the mediums and the materials that you can print on in order to get her messages across. So she's done everything from large posters, billboards, electric signs, and sort of like raising questions about heavy topics, specifically feminism here, for or using graphic design modes and avenues. So I know that's a really sort of quick chapter, but I put some videos up for you guys to check out with that because there's more that you can get into, and especially if you're into design or any of those works, please check them out. But in chapter 11, we're moving out of the two-dimensional arts and into the three-dimensional works, and specifically sculpture. Right? I list some questions there. Is all sculpture really alike? So we're going to talk about the types of sculptures. What are maybe some mediums and the building techniques, and what are we doing now with it? So the types of sculptures, really, there's just a few. You either have a full round sculpture, which the viewer can walk around any angle and look at it. We think of, let's say, like the Statue of David, right? That's a full round. You can walk completely around it. It's meant to be viewed at any angle. And then we have relief sculpture, or work that's only meant to be seen by 180 degrees. Probably still be on a panel or a wall somewhere. It's just kind of coming out of the surface, but you can't see completely underneath it, right? It's just from that one side. And then the installation experience, where you're literally walking through the piece. The piece itself is larger than you can fully contain, so you have to walk around it and in it. Okay, an example of full round. We've seen Louis Bourgeoisie's work before with a dry point etching, and here's that same etching that was a sketch turned into the sculpture, right? It's full round, and you could even go to say, because you could probably walk on around and underneath, there could be an installation effect to this as well. Relief, right? We have a low relief in the top right where it's just raised ever so much from the surface, and then high relief, which is where it's carved, and you can see where objects seem to be farther out than others. There's a sense of depth in the space. We can almost look around some of those figures to see more details. So a couple types of relief. Now, when you're making a sculpture, it comes down to just these three sort of methods, right? We're either adding, or an additive process, right? We're modeling, we're adding to. You can think of like clay can be an additive process. Anywhere where you're taking a medium and adding onto, right? Pretty subtractive, like carving stone. You can also carve away clay, but anywhere you're removing. And then indirect, meaning that there's sort of a combination of processes and some other way, in this way, casting, regardless of the material we use, to help build that form. So you yourself aren't making all of the, let's say you're making a face, right? You're going to sort of model and mold up, but when you pour the material over there, it's just going to form on top of it. So that's what I mean, sort of indirect. The final product is sort of indirectly created from the other steps that you've done. So here's a great example of sort of additive, right? You sort of take that original body and sort of put those forms onto it. So here we have this clay form, and you can imagine starting with a small ball and sort of forming it into the shape and adding in the details to build up relief, and adding and continually adding till you have all the details you want. Subtractive, would be a piece of wood that then is carved away, right? You can you can make additive wood sculptures but usually your forms are pretty much set. Like if you took 2x4s and nailed them together again and again and again, that's additive. But in this way, we have that block of wood, and we're removing that material down methodically to get something like this. And indirect or casting. And the YouTube link has the video of how this works. I highly suggest checking it out because there'll be some quiz questions on it. But the idea that usually known as lost cast waxing, commonly known as lost wax casting. Sorry. And what there's a variety of ways that can be done, but the way that I've done it, instead of starting with the clay mold, because you can use clay to make it hollow inside, but we would just take the lost wax itself, or wax is known, and you can just build up with wax and using it warm, like heat guns and warm tools and stuff, and you carve whatever you want out of wax, and then you take that wax and you can coat it in plaster and add some ventilation tubes, as you're seeing added in here, right? And then putting that into an investment, which makes it sort of this big old block cube, and then you can stick that in the oven. And what that does is melt all the wax out, leaving a space in the mold. And then once that space has been created, you have your bronze that's really hot, and you can now pour it into that cast and create a piece from it. You have to end up breaking that mold apart to do that, so it's kind of a one-shot deal. But check out the YouTube video because they show different ways of doing like the hollow core and such. So we have bronze, I just mentioned, and like the last piece, but we also have slip casting. This is where you're using liquefied clay, or usually done with porcelain since it's really fine grain, and you can pour it into a similar mold to create a slip cast. And a lot of you can think of sort of going over to your grandma's house or something, and they'll have all these like figurines, these clay figurines. All of those are made from slip casting. Assembling. This is an interesting sort of one that I like to throw in there, right? Where you're sort of adding to another sort of additive process. And I just love this piece, how they sort of entangle together. But you're taking one form and in this case welding to the next, welding to the next, welding to the next, welding to the next, as it kind of continues to grow out. Let's talk about a little bit of art history within sculpture, and specifically the human form, as it is a huge source of inspiration. And a term that you'll need to know is contrapposto. And contrapposto is what the form you're seeing, what's happening here. And what we have is weight in sculpture was very difficult for a long period of time because you can imagine things could break, and so things were very stiff. We think of like Egyptian and even earlier forms, the Sumerians and such that we'll take a look at. All those sculptures themselves seem to have a very solid, sturdy base. They were balanced symmetrically, and there wasn't a whole lot of movement implied, or the application of this thing going to be coming out in space. Well, when we get to the Greeks now, we can see how the arms are coming away and off from the body, so we have these open gaps, things like that would not have happened in cultures previously. But the weight has been put all in this one leg, and this other one now can be at a turn. It's a positioning of the hips, and this is known as contrapposto, where we're shifting weight in the stance of the subject. This becomes huge for us in our history. Now, yes, this is a Roman copy, but of a Greek statue. Most Greek statues exist because of Roman copies, but this allowed the sculptor to really see and challenge the block itself, and really becomes highly influential to the Renaissance later. Time and place in sculpture. This slide's very interesting because sculptures can be used. We've talked about earthworks before with the spiral jetty, and this is what Robert Smith probably used his inspiration from, this idea of moving works. And these are mounds created by Native American tribes. There are over 10,000 mounds in the United States that we know of. There's probably even more than that were made by previous native tribes and cultures. And this one in Ohio from the Mississippian culture, using these that, for when viewed from above, we can kind of get the entire image of what's going on. So we realize that these images are probably made specifically to be viewed from above, meaning probably religious in ways, ceremonial, spiritual, probably addressing the gods. And some of them were burial mounds as well. I don't think this one was specifically. I'm not too sure, but uh, this these are very sacred sites. And so sculpture now, we've using inspiration from them. We create a lot of natural sculptures uh, um, that a lot of artists like Andy Goldsworthy and stuff use just nature itself, gathering up pieces that you find and using that sort of an assemblage you get to create interesting design and installation. Uh, this last piece, and I want you to check out the film on Canopy called The Gates. And it's a quick film, and you kind of jump through it, and it just talks about sort of the collaborative effort to create this, uh, all these silk, crimson silk, uh, sort of banners that are hung and unfurled throughout the entire walking paths of New York Central Park, and how it was a community effort putting it up, and how you're supposed to walk through it, and miles and miles of this, and sort of listen to what people have to say about it. There's a lot of pieces, installation pieces out there, so it's pretty interesting. For some, it comes off as a little bit, well, where's the artist in this? Because it's almost like the viewer is directing themselves, and the artist is just kind of there to sort of present an idea and sometimes an experience. But you begin to realize that a lot of space around us has been crafted and molded in a very specific way for us to receive an emotion from it, and makes you kind of just sort of look around and challenge your space even more. So